commerce, pre-sales, commerce and technology at Ogilvy. Welcome to our webinar, Building Exceptional Brand Loyalty, Not Selling. Thank you for joining, and thank you to our speakers, Julian at Zalora, Head of CRM, Majid at Braze, Customer Engagement Evangelist, and Suresh from Verticurl, Director of Customer Experience. We'll be talking about what does loyalty mean for your business in the context of a number of points here. So it's not necessarily about an individual product or service, but a result of multiple positive interactions that build trust over time. What are the reasons customers stay loyal to a brand? And also then customers don't necessarily become disloyal from poor experience, but how well the business handles the problem. Before we get moving through the webinar, I'm providing a few statistics here. So 86% of people will recommend a company to friends and family through CRM and loyalty. 66% likely to write a positive online review after a good experience, and 46% will remain loyal even after a bad experience. Interesting. And then what we can do is start moving forward. But before we do, I remind you and invite you to present any questions you have in the chat. We may not reach your question through this webinar, but as we move forward, we'll reach out afterwards. The white paper is in the chat. So as we move forward, I'll start this off. I'm going to ask Julian, in regards to the first talking point, how does Zalora look at CRM generally, and how do you create multiple positive interactions for your customers?
All right, thank you, Tim, and good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where all our viewers are. I'll just do a quick one first on like CRM, right? It's very important to define what our scope is. In some organizations, it comprises a lot more of the, for example, loyalty programs, customer service, customer experience functions. In Zalora, CRM, we focus primarily upon, hey, how can we engage the customer and get the customer to come back and conduct a repurchase, right? And that needs us to look into the customer behavior, look into their preferences, look into what's on the website, and kind of curate that best experience for them. So that, in essence, is how CRM plays a huge part in Zalora. Now, to the question, how do we create multiple positive interactions for our customers, right? I think from my experience, we need to break up the conversation into two components, right? It's all good and fancy to try and say, oh, we should try and create wow moments. We should have innovative ideas that speak to the audience. But a lot of these will easily fall flat if we do not have the right, I would say, ways of working or organizational alignment or approach towards getting there, right? Positive experiences are really a people thing. And people create these experiences. So we need to make sure that there is that right freedom to focus and be empathetic towards it. All right, with that long intro, now let me get into the meat of it, right, of what I think. First one being the team. I think that's super important. There are two elements of the team that I would want to emphasize on. Number one, linking the team's objective to positive interactions. And I don't mean like having their own KPIs and then having a separate set of KPIs on saying, oh, at least create 2 wow projects, right? I mean, they're day in, day out. The KPIs should be aligned that it is nested as part of it, as a means for achieving their objective, right? By doing it that way, then you would ensure that it's not so much of a battle of prioritization, but really the means to an end. Because we're trying to use those positive interactions as the driver. If we create positive experiences, but not drive any positive outcome, then it's not so meaningful, right? I mean, anyone can come, give you $1 million to buy a product that's worth $1, right? So at a cost, a lot of these things are possible, but you want to do it such that it's sustainable for the team as well as for the business, right? So we need to also see whether the eventual, I would say, impact is going to be meaningful in terms of the repeat conversion. Is that sustainable? Is that profitable? And that the teams can have that access and freedom towards how they do things and how they achieve things, given that your alignment is on that overarching goal. So the first one is really on that very clear objective being aligned, and positive interactions are a means to achieve that objective, number one. Number two is then the freedom of empathy component that I briefly touched upon. I think that comes from really having strong ownership. Your customer champions building these experiences must have that accountability, but also that freedom to create and own these outcomes. And I think a lot of times we need to avoid traps that are very common, right? Like the term HIPPO, highest paid person opinion, dominating it too much, right? There's a high tendency for people to veer too much to their superiors, their managers' point of view. But really, we want these people to, hey, empathy is an important skill, and it's something that we must practice as we craft these experiences. So that's the branch of the team component. The second component that I wanted to touch on is how are we going to approach the initiatives, right? Because you could have all these objectives perfectly aligned, but if you don't approach the initiatives in a way that gets you on the ground running, you end up not having that desired outcome as well. So I think first and foremost, I feel that it's very important to be structured, right? Listing high value actions, prioritizing, responding to high drop-off points. Those are usually the key areas that are opportunities that we can tap on already, right? Prioritize your highest value customers first as the groups to serve. Why? Very pragmatic, right? They give you the most so-called money, value, but they also give you the most data from their actions. So that's the group that you can really, I think, serve better. Of course, if your organization is at a different stage, early growing stage, then you need to see in terms of, hey, which are the important groups that we should serve more, be it the newer joiners, the early stage, and to see if their behavior is sticky after that, right? Second point that's slightly related to what we mentioned earlier is ensuring that the right support levers are available. And these support levers can be things like features, all right, technical features, capabilities, the ability to show something, the ability to serve a content, the ability to send a content such as an email, push, SMS, so on and so forth, and that all these things can speak to each other, right? Another means is that we need to make sure that the supporting lever of information, such as knowing when a customer is going to buy, knowing what a customer is going to buy or what category, that's then a very important component because it empowers the teams a lot to have a specific focus and therefore craft the experience around it. But we break down a lot of this decision making that can then be automated in smaller components and make it much more manageable. Last but not least, when it comes to initiatives, I think the first and very most important thing is get the UX right? How fast it loads, how clear it is, how well you communicate, the contrast, the clickability, all these things are hygienes that should be top priority, right? You can have the best asset, but if your link is broken, nothing matters. So that's how I would actually package it together on the two components, having team focus viewpoint first, and then having the initiatives component. Hope that answers it, Tim.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Suresh, would you have anything to add in this regards as well?
Absolutely.
And then we can ask Marjith too.
Yeah, first of all, wow. I think, this is like a thesis in terms of how to go about it. Julian, I had a few specific questions for you in terms of high value actions. Now, when you at Zalora, for example, do you have a hypothesis initially based on just common understanding in terms of e-commerce behaviors, especially in fast fashion, for example, or any of the categories, and then you execute against it and then track that? And also as a thing to that, is there a high value action that you have discovered that wasn't obvious based on when you were actually looking at some of the data that was coming through in terms of defining it? So being a little more specific in terms of how the audience or how anyone else who's interested with your experience in terms of how can they identify a high value action if you don't have one to start with, and then what to look for in order to identify a high value action.
So I think that's something that's very easy to get lost in, right? Run millions of correlation analysis, regression, try and crunch some data. You might make shapes or like images in the clouds that might not exist, right? So I think that's where the way I'll approach it at the beginning, it's, hey, what's the conversion funnel for you, right? Different organizations will be different, but then there are different steps. So one thing that I learned was, for example, there was this progression which I hypothesized. People will come to the website first, view a product first. If they like it, they will add it to wish list. Later on, they might decide to add it to cart, and then later on decide whether they want to actually purchase or not. So having that progression. Over time, what I realized is that, hey, my stronger touch point, obviously, first one is the cart, which has a very strong intent, but my serve intent had a much stronger value than the wish listing intent. And why that is so, it may be a lot to do with the shopping behavior. It perhaps could be that, hey, if you are really interested, you will add it to cart immediately. Adding to wish list might be more of an uncertainty element. It might be more of, hey, you're just waiting for the price element, waiting for the size element. So that's where we actually found a lot of value on the even surfing component, where customers were actually clicking, looking at products, not doing anything after that. But when we serve them the right recommendations at that stage, it became one of the strongest drivers for us. So high value actions, if I were to simplify, start with the funnel, look at where there is the critical mass first, and then test in terms of the opportunities of where we can actually see, hey, there is value, there is not, and what are the things that we can do. By looking at the critical mass, you already have an idea of, hey, we should do, we should actually try something over here. There are some other things which we thought would be very, very strong levers, but it ended up being less meaningful at the beginning. Example, customers who were searching for products, right? So a lot of the times the search term is, the customer has something very specific in mind, but it was a huge hurdle for us to guess what it is at the beginning, because you might say shoes, but actually you had a very specific sort of shoes. You just were not able to express it in words. Thus, when we use that as a word and as a form of recommendation, it might not have performed as strongly for us in terms of a high value action.
So I think this relates largely to another question that we have. So thank you, Julian, for that. This is around interacting with the brand. So maybe Majid, the question that we have here is, what do consumers expect when they interact with a brand, and why do they leave? Julian talk about high value actions, and this relates very nicely to this question here. Can you enlighten us a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. Great question. And Gillian, as you were speaking, I was literally making notes, right? So I will come to those points as well. I'll touch a bit upon what you talked about now. Tim, in today's world, there has been an evolution of devices and channels, right? So that'd be smartphones, smartwatches, tablets, PCs, and on the other side, the channels has been evolving as well, right? Email, web push, mobile push, in-app, and the list has been growing and growing, right? And when we did a research together with Forrester Consulting, ask consumers, what do they expect from a brand that they engage with? And the answer was simple, right? They expect brands to speak like a regular person would, right? Number one. And number two, they expect brands to, this is very important, understand what matters to them right now, right? And then also to communicate with them at their convenient times, and also through the channels that they prefer, right? And that kind of brings back to the point that Gillian was making, right? So what is that you can do to keep your customers coming back, right? Gillian, you mentioned a beautiful, beautiful word, which is being empathetic, right? And I think that is really, really important for brands when they engage with their consumers, irrespective of the channels that they engage with, right? And now, the point is, how can you create moments that matter, right? So we all know, Tim, consumer behaviors and preferences are changing regularly, right? And that changed over the last couple of years widely than ever before, right? So as a brand, are you capturing those changing consumer behaviors and preferences so that you can be relevant and add value in the specific time of the consumer life cycle, right? Oftentimes, brands really don't think about that, right? So think about the context of where your customer has been, right? Where they are right now and where they want to go. And that is really key to creating that brilliant customer experiences, right? I will give you a very simple example, Tim, right? It's 7:45 in London now. We are on this call since 7 in the morning, right? By like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the evening, I would be like done by the day, right? I probably don't want it to do anything serious, just, Netflix and chill, right? And based on my past browsing history, based on my previous watching history, I would like to, Netflix let me know, hey, this is the content that you probably would enjoy today, right? So that's number one. And number two, I probably don't want to cook either, right? Because I'm just going to be tired, right? Based on my browsing history with the QSR industry that I have been engaging with, I would like to let them know, hey, you know what? The food that you have been ordering has gone down by price in the restaurant that you just ordered last Thursday, right? And that for me is adding value, right? So as a media and entertainment industry, as a QSR industry, if they know this is how I have been engaging with them, these are my favorite food and these are my favorite shows to watch, if they would let me know on a moment like this, I would really appreciate, right? And this is what consumers expect. Understand how they are engaging with you and use that information to target them with relevant and meaningful information. And that's exactly how you create moments that matter. Tim.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Majid. I think in a consumer's mind as well, a lot of what you said there could be some of the true drivers of loyalty. So we've got a number of pillars that we can perhaps talk to in terms of, you talked about an easy shopping experience, maybe certainly personal shopping experience. So then there's product quality, of course, that matters, and value for money in that easy shopping experience, and pricing, of course, related to that value for money. And one thing that certainly organizations perhaps often lose sight of because it's not the marketing aspect is the customer service. Gillian, in Zalora's experience, in your experience, what do you find keeps customers coming back?
In our experience, I would say the biggest learning I've had is that what you want or what you think or what you aspire to be your core offering to the customer may not be that in reality. And that, I think, can boil down to a few factors, right? It can be the type of customers, or it's just your intent versus your actions. You may be actually promoting something very, very, very different. So I think that's the first and foremost thing that was quite a big learning to me. If the key thing that keeps people having a particular repeat behavior is evident, then that's really the thing that you need to be able to suss out, right? So for example, right, in Majid's case, was it convenience or was it the quality, or which one played a bigger factor in terms of that repeat behavior? Because by doing that, then you'll be able to further tap on it, expand upon it. So one example, right, for Zalora was that, hey, we sell fashion items. We try and connect people to the limitless world of fashion, right? Because fashion is empowering, but people have different needs for it. Right. So one particular group, especially before COVID times, was the group that, hey, enjoys wearing different dresses and changing them frequently. Of course, after that, they may resell it, donate it, or have other purposes, but they enjoy expressing their style in different ways. So we may think that, hey, for a lot of these customers, what they actually want is a huge variety, or that, they want something that is very trendy. So that may be true. But what we found out was that, hey, what really brought them to buy those things again and again was that we made it affordable. We didn't give a huge premium barrier, right? We allow people to have the access to fashion as and when they need it. And that was really one of the key things that I think kept the customers buying. So even though we didn't set out to be, we are a massive discount hunter and you're just going to come for the cheapest price, that ended up being in part one of the key reasons that customers keep coming back. So how we then embraced it was that, hey, this is a living, breathing, important part of e-commerce, especially in Southeast Asia. So let's not fool ourselves and think that we can go without any discounts. Customers expect it. So let's embrace it, but then let's use that as part of our day-to-day, as our USPs, so that that consistency to the customer, that we will always have something that is accessible to you, is always going to be there, right? So we know that discounts matter, right? We know that the products matter. We know that the ease of using things matter, right? But a lot of these, sometimes what may seem very important to the experience based on customers' feedback, example, huge complaints about sizing, right? Some things customers may accept more simply because things are not as, I would say, developed yet in the region. So for example, free shipping as a USP is extremely important, I think, in these parts. And that's a lot to do with the perception of it. So even though, right, as a fraction of the total cost, it might be negligible, people value free shipping as a kind of like, as a service you provide to them a lot more. And that's where, hey, say, instead of giving it to you as a discount, we give it to you as free shipping. It takes away that worry and allows you to feel that, hey, you know, we are really serving you right, because we could be giving you the same amount of discounts, but it's important that we serve it to you in the right way. Some people prefer their soup in a bowl. Some people may prefer their soup in a very shallow plate, because it cools down faster, perhaps. Right. So I think at the end of the day, we got to just keep evolving and listening to the customers, you know, because there are all these levers. I think you laid them out very, very well, but it's very hard to tackle everything at once, right? And really, it's cutting through the noise. A lot of times people may speak, they may complain very loudly, but that may not be the main or the biggest problem or the pillar that is bringing the customer back to you.
Okay, yeah, I do have a couple of points for you guys.
I was going to ask you,
Suresh. Yeah. Imagine you had an advertisement for Play Me Something on Netflix, as it is. Yeah. So two specific things I wanted to kind of like ask. You know, in our experience, when we are helping clients to get all of the data in place so that we can do these real-time actions, we can do these predictions, and we can make these kind of recommendations, etc. It's been a challenge in terms of, you know, how you collect the data, what sort of tagging is done, and how do you kind of like, you know, then process it using any sort of machine learning, artificial intelligence, etc. Maybe you can just shed a little bit of light of that. And also, Zillian, a follow-up question to you is, you know, we understand. I mean, if you look at the funnel and you look at the economics, discount immediately takes away from you. And then when you all start to order things like, you know, free shipping, etc., there is a cost involved. Definitely. I mean, it's a bigger discussion in terms of pricing, in terms of like, you know, profit margins, etc. Is there sometimes where you've experimented in terms of just framing the proposition psychologically different compared to how people will be looking at it in terms of, you know, yes, people are used to mindset, people are used to value, but like, you know, instead of looking at discount, has there been any sort of experiment in terms of like, you know, framing it so that like, you know, just has the same effect of value versus a perceived value versus an actual value that's being given to discount?
Yeah, am I going first?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean, one of the points that you mentioned, right? The question that I keep asking myself, right, which is, there are plenty of brands out there, they keep on collecting data, but the question is, are you using that data to create that meaningful customer experiences, right? So most of the time the answer is no, right? So it's not just about collecting data, it's about creating that meaningful experiences. And oftentimes, you know, the one thing that we advise is, you know, how are you using or leveraging those data to create those wonderful moments with your consumers? And as Julian was talking about, you know, individuals are different, right? Some come to your site or product or services purely for discount seeking, and some are high-end shoppers, and some prefer one channel versus the other, and some are like very early morning visitors, and some are probably like night owls, right? So are you understanding how and when these users are engaging with your brand, and how are you leveraging data to engage with these consumers? And end of the day, that's what actually matters, right? And then the focus, of course, you know, going to be first-party data and zero-party data, right? The data that you can collect directly from your consumers about their preferences, right, and their behaviors, and that's what's going to tell you at the end of the day. And because we are going to live in that zero and first-party data, right? Because depth of cookies, It's not very far away, right? So as a brand, are you going to focus on these issues? And one of the research that we have done, customer engagement review, and when we interviewed more than 1,500 BP plus in 14 different global markets with an annual revenue of 10 million plus, one of the top challenges that they talk about is that data collection and data management, right? So if you're one of those brands out there struggling to figure that out, start now. Collect the right data and use that data to create meaningful engagement and then leverage data for smart segmentation. Suresh.
Thank you.
Right, and just to top it off with the second question you asked, which is, have we ever experimented with framing the proposition differently, right? And creating like perceived value versus actual value. I will talk a bit about, okay, there's your typical stuff, right? Which you use in marketing techniques like fear of missing out. When they say limited stocks only, it's like, technically speaking, everything is limited stocks, right? It's just how much access you give on that front. So I think a lot of times, I wouldn't say that we create fake value, but more of, even though your value is there, the USP might be there, you might believe that it's very strong and well known, your customers might not actually be aware of it. And that's one of the key things I think that we've seen repeatedly over time. Example, for Zalora, we've had free shippings as long as you spend above a very, very reasonable amount. It's actually considered a very low amount versus some competitors. And we have free returns whereby, hey, size doesn't fit right, we don't want you to worry. So we have those two things since day one, right? And that has always been around. We've always called it out. But when we ask surveys, when we send out surveys to the customer, a lot of them don't really seem to be aware of it, right? They either may have just missed out on it, or it might be something that has become so much part of the fold whereby it's just noise to them, or we don't weave it into our messaging strongly enough. So I think that's where, in terms of that perceived value component, it might be a lot of the times even the awareness that plays a big factor. But a lot of these other things that we were already, how would I say, modeling into our business, where we already say, hey, if they do this, we can give them these kind of services. And we already made it so much part of our day-to-day. However, customers just did not seem to be aware of it, right? So a bit answering your question in the opposite way, but then therefore, what did we do? We began to call it out a lot more than we thought that we needed to, and actually to see, hey, did this help customers become more certain about making their next purchase, about especially their new purchase, especially for newer customers. And that actually helped us with some of our experiments in terms of actually framing it more clearly to the customer, helping with some of the perceived value, the conversion rate, as well as the loyalty of customer. A lot of the times, the customers that are working the best with you, like the people who buy many, many times, they already expect all these things out of you. But a huge opportunity is then all the new customers that come in and are not aware. By raising the awareness, you open up the possible huge inflow of customers moving on to the next stage and potentially in the end becoming a valuable customer.
Sure.
Great. So you noted a couple of times there, Julian, that of course, new customers. We've talked a lot about loyalty, and so loyalty isn't everything. Suresh, I think you've probably got some thoughts around that as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a hot topic when we talk about, and from my experience working with brands as well. When we talk about data-driven marketing, or we talk about database-driven marketing, or any sort of marketing where we're having first-party, second-party data, it depends category by category. Now, personally, for example, I don't register on every site that I go into, and brands would have some amount of anonymous and probably some amount of known data about me. Yeah? And also, if you're looking at, there are two schools of thoughts. I mean, the thing is use the Pareto principle to use your 80-20 or 60-40, where you're going to get the most bang, and focus your efforts, marketing efforts on that. There's the Brian Sharp school of thought, which is saying penetration is the only way to grow, because penetration and loyalty are kind of a thing that no one is loyal to one particular brand. They're going to be buying from multiple brands, except that their share is always going to be different. So this is one thing that I wanted to kind of ask. Yes, the topic of today is about loyalty, but what effect does penetration or acquisition have in terms of like, driving loyalty down the funnel?
So they're certainly linked. Margit, what do you think a few of the strategies a brand can take to initiate and build long-term relationship with their customers that have behaved a little bit like Suresh, logged in, perhaps haven't registered? How can we approach this? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. Same. I mean, I would love to make, like, let's say 3 points, right? So the first one, take care of the customer onboarding journey, right? So when a user sign up to your product or services, these customers have already chosen to engage with your brand, right? So, which is a great thing, right? And as Suresh mentioned, oftentimes, many users don't tend to register when they buy your product or services. I mean, we call them anonymous users, and there are ways to engage with them too. That's a topic for another day, which is a great topic to talk about. So these customers, they have already chosen to engage with your brand. So effective onboarding campaigns should strengthen your argument and act as a powerful incentive to more fully commit to exploring your brand's offerings, right? Talk about everything that you offer, be transparent. And the very important thing here is build trust from the very moment of the customer onboarding journey, right? So if you're in the financial services, right, the first thought that comes to anybody's mind is my money safe? Right? So are you building trust as a brand to your consumers? And number one. And number two, ask feedback to your consumers, right? So customers have opinions and they don't always take the time to send clear signals about what they do like and what they don't like, right? About the brand experiences. So unless you ask them, they're not going to let you know, right? So use the preference centers. Jillian talked about surveys as well. Ask your consumers directly what they like and what they don't like. Use that information to engage with them in a relevant and meaningful way. And then final point would be cross-channel outreach, right? To reach your audience effectively, communicate using multiple channels. In today's world, your consumers are using more than one channel, and as a brand, you should be using that too, right? And Jillian mentioned a very important point in the beginning of the conversation, which is channels, right? I mean, does the systems talk to each other? Does the channels talk to each other, right? One example that I'm going to give you, one of the brands that I engage with, retail brand here, right? I buy a pair of jeans and the jeans arrives. I don't like it for some of the other reasons. Maybe the quality is low or the size doesn't fit, right? And I send it the very next day back to the retailer, right? But they do not understand that. What they do, just after I send it, they send me an email saying that, hey, how was your experience? Do you like our product? Of course, I did not like it. That's why I send it back, right? But then a push notification comes in and say, hey, rate our product. Of course, I'm going to rate it low, right? This is what happens when systems doesn't talk to each other, right? So as a brand, are you understanding how I am interacting?
Just adding on to what you're saying, I mean, earlier you were talking about being empathetic, and this is where automation almost makes it tone deaf in terms of like how you're engaging with the consumer or the customer in this case.
Yeah, I mean, you say, well, the system should talk to each other, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you use the machine language to really understand how your users are engaging with your brand, then you can build that empathy in your customer journey. If you don't, if your systems don't talk to each other, that's when you get the disconnected customer experience, right? So oftentimes this is what happens with the brand. So you need to really understand how your users are engaging so that you can use that information. And that's the 3 points, Tim, that I want to make.
Thank you, Margit. That's insightful. I mean, there's so much linkage between acquisition and retention and activation and engaging to build strategies over time for longevity. And I want to talk a little bit about potential misconceptions that businesses make in regards to loyalty. I know to a certain extent, there's too much focus on acquisition, coupled with rising costs of digital advertising. Suresh, could you enlighten me with any of your experiences that you see in regard to common misconceptions?
About loyalty or acquisition?
Well, in regards to what are the common misconceptions that business make in regards to loyalty? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the thing is like one of the things that I would say misconception is like it's a very short-term thing. Yeah, that you're just looking for sales overnight, or we're looking for the next time period, and so on. But you know, it's actually much more powerful. I think two things that perhaps one is like there's a lot of learning that can be had from loyalty behaviors, which you could use in across the funnel. Yeah. That's one thing, that loyalty is mostly for sales, but not a source of information, you know, source of like, you know, just understanding purchase behaviors, etc. That is one of the things that I would think. You know, there are other things in terms of there is a perception that loyalty means deep discounts. Okay, and that is something that I would say, and you know, the budget, Zillian, you could perhaps share some of the misconceptions that you guys hear about on a daily basis.
I think there's perhaps another one is not treating all customers equally.
Yeah.
You know, that's one that I've seen time and time again. An important. Shiraz, what do you think?
It's also, I mean, just on that, like, you know, the airlines specifically do it. You know, the tiers get treated very differently based on their loyalty, and the loyalty is a function of how frequently you fly them, or like how frequently you buy from there. Yeah. So definitely, I think, I mean, like, you know, there is a thing that the tiering and all of the other loyalty mechanisms that we have is factored in terms of driving repeat purchase, or in terms of like continued transactions with that particular brand as well. No.
Can I just jump in over here, right? I think one very, very important thing is that we distinguish when we look at the data, be it from surveys, be it like we do some data crunching, right? Important to split between our tiering of the customer or classification of the customer based on their value to us or their behavior with us, right? These two things may overlap in some ways, but I'll give you an example using myself. I am what we classify in Zalora as a occasion buyer. I seldom make a purchase. I make a purchase on average once a year. I like to buy the same thing over and over again because I invest very heavily into research of one particular type of product. So I may buy the same t-shirt in different colors, but I may own 20 of the same type of things because early in the funnel, I spent a lot of time and effort in that consideration. So discounts, if you were to ask, does it matter to every customer, any customer? $10 versus $9, who wouldn't take the $9, right? It's just the effort that, you know, and the waiting for it. Does it really matter to them? So that's what I mean by, you know, between the behavior, what I described was my shopping behavior, right? Which was very different from the value to the company, to Zalora, which if I made like many orders and my orders are huge, I may be super high value, right? But if I have very low profitability because I only buy clearance items, maybe I wouldn't want to be prioritized as much in terms of the efforts. So I think that's where it's very important. Are you looking at value or behavior? Why it's important to make that distinction is because you want to focus your resources on value, right? Of course, some of them are going to be lower value customers who then overlap in terms of the groups that you would like. But that's just natural, right? There's never going to be a perfect mutually exclusive type of grouping. But that's just the point that I wanted to add, I think, for us to all be very aware, right? Not only does loyalty start from day zero, but if we start not being clear about that perception of value versus behavior, we can end up prioritizing our efforts in the wrong way.
So we thank you, Julian, for that. So we don't really want to rely heavily on incentives to condition those consumers, whether they're new or loyal. We want to provide value to them and value to the business. And of course, for relying heavily on those incentives and conditioning consumers to receive irrelevant offers, it's just going to turn its customers off the brand. That's certainly in my experience over time, and listening to you speak here, it sounds like that's very relevant today as well, and will continue to be so. There's one more point around misconception, is around single channel integration. Majid, perhaps you could talk a little bit about that from a data to CX or omnichannel from a platform side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Tim, you may think in a digital first world, right? It's a common sense that brands should engage with consumers, right? But that's not the case, right? There are so many brands out there, they do not engage at all. They do not even send a single message to your consumers. So when we looked at the data, right? So what happens when you don't send messages at all versus sending messages through one channel, right? I mean, sending messages through one channel, of course, it's a lot better than sending no messages at all. And when we looked at the results, if you could send at least messages through one channel, your consumers would be retained 3 times longer, right? So this is based on the customer engagement review report that we published last year, which is an amazing result to begin, right? So if you're a brand listening today, start engaging with your consumers at least through one channel. And then we compared the single channel to 2 channels, right? So while there are like many brands out there, they technically leverage multiple consumer channels, they tend to rely on only one channel for majority of their campaigns, right? So for example, older companies are often email centric, right? While startups are often, they tend to overuse push notifications, which we see across the demography. And if you could send messages to at least 2 channels, there is a highly likely that you're going to increase the purchase by 73%, and also more than 40% you would increase in lifetime value with your consumers. Again, this is based on the report that we have published, right? So, but what do exceptional brands do? What do successful brands do, right? So they create a blend between in-product and out-of-product messages, right? In-product, like, in-app messages, in-browser messages, and out-of-product, like email, SMS, mobile, web push. If you could create a blend between these 2 and then use that as a means to engage with your consumers, and this is when we see better results. So if you're a brand using no channels, try and use a single channel. If you are using single channel, try and bring in multiple channels into the mix to create that connected, cohesive customer experiences. Tim.
I just want to kind of build on that thing. And just this morning, we were having a discussion with a QSR brand here in Asia. And the question of multi-channel comes up again. Do we use app? Do we use push notification? Do we use SMS? Do we use email? Do we use other means of communication, etc.? And one of the key things was like, okay, yes, there are preferences which consumers give us in terms of like, okay, how do I like to be communicated, or how do I like to be reached, and what do I want to opt in for? And then when you have multiple channels, yes, you do have features like in your platform, Braze, where you can automatically push or prioritize one of the channels. But in the absence of data, when you're starting out at the very beginning stages, if you have a few options in terms of multi-channel engagement, perhaps you could give us some guidance in terms of like, how to choose between the channels in terms of like, orders, so that the same consumer does not feel like they're being inundated with like 3 messages from 3 channels talking about the same thing.
Yeah, you mentioned the data in between, right? Of course, data is the building block for all the campaigns out there. And one of the common misconceptions is, sending no messages is also personalization, right? So there are brands, they should get that. Just because you are using too many channels doesn't mean that you should send too many messages, right? So one example that I can give you is one of the airlines that I was chatting with. They asked me, hey, is 10 messages too much on a single day? Right? Well, it really depends. For example, you probably have sent me already 9 emails, right? Let's put it that way, right? I mean, like 9 messages through multiple channels, and then I'm taking a flight, I'm at the airport, the gate changes. Now, do you send me a message or SMS, let's say, or push notification and let me know the gate changed? Or do you think that we have already sent 9 messages? Should we send the 10th message now?
If you had an auto rule in place, yeah.
Right? So that's what the importance of messaging is, right? So irrespective of the channels that you use, it really depends on, is it important for your consumer, right? Number one. Number two, every message that you send, coming back to the empathy point, right? Is it adding value, and is it being relevant to the consumers in that particular consumer life cycle, right? So it's not just about choosing the channel, it's about using that channel in a much more meaningful way to engage. That's what I would say.
Sure.
Thanks. That's very good. Thank. You talked about some of the solutions to solve the misconceptions. So maybe we can look at some of the challenges businesses are facing as well. Majid, we talked about channels. Just touched on this. So what role does channels play, and how does it create customer-centric communication to help retain those consumers and avoid the churn that we've been mentioning previously?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So again, it comes back to the point of, leveraging data for smart segmentation and using multiple channels to create communications in such a way, understanding how your consumers are engaging with your brand, right? So like we talked about in the beginning, some prefers email, some prefers push notification, right? And every channel, in my opinion, has a kind of purpose to serve, right? Email being one of the most important channels. Do you remember the time, Tim, like when all those new channels came up, everybody said, email is going to be dead. Well, email is still alive, and it's going to be alive as well in the future, right? But if you look at push notifications, it kind of creates a sense of urgency, right? So let's say there is an offer running out, right? You wanted to redeem that offer like 24 hours in advance. So push notifications could be one of the channels that you can send to drive the traffic directly to the app, right? And we see quite a lot of brands doing that, right? Using push notification as a channel to engage with your consumers at that last moment of time to drive them back to the app and to redeem, right? And for a consumer, that is about adding value, right? Because they're going to save money from the offers and the services that you provide, right? So again, for us, it's always about using channels during the specific life cycle of the customer journey, understanding how they are actually moving along, and then use that channel as a benefit for your brand to create that customer-centric communication. And I think that's what really important. And then again, like I mentioned, Tim, the benefits of using single channel versus two channel, and then sending no messages at all, and the results that brands are going to get. And that leads me to the point of creating connected customer experiences, as and when your consumers jump from one devices to another, one channel to another, or you're engaging with them.
And if I may just add very quickly, right? Especially when it comes to the problems, what I've seen as well. Number one way to solve, purpose-driven, right? Of course, don't send an email if your house is on fire. So I think really having very clear of the purpose will really tell you whether you need to send it via the channel. Second one, I think it's a lot more response-driven. Example, if I tell you that there is a sale via a push notification, there is a chance you are going to miss it because our phones are extremely noisy these days with so many messages coming through. So when you look that there is no response, it is absolutely valid to therefore communicate via another channel if it is important or if it is an opportunity. So if I know like 99% of my people, if they don't open a push notification in the first 10 minutes, they are never going to open the app after that. If I am certain about that, then that's something I can act upon. So that's really response-driven. First was purpose-driven. This is response-driven. The last one, very pragmatically speaking, is just cost, right? People may prefer letter, paper invoices. Why is everyone moving towards e-invoices? It's cheaper, right? Of course, we put the angle of it's sustainable. Definitely protecting the world is very important, but pragmatically speaking, it's cost. Very few people are going to say, hey, I'm going to use the most expensive channel as my first touch point. Push notifications, much more scalable in cost than email. Email, much more scalable in cost in SMS. So if there's a need to test, you want to design that way as well, simply because of the cost of engagement and the return. It's always worth testing, of course, whether maybe if you do an SMS earlier, capturing them earlier is more important, but that's kind of just a usual structured flow that a lot of organizations approach it by. If we bridge over to the point of how to make these decisions, I think that really boils down to having very, very, very specific data-centric decisioning or automation. Don't expect everything to be solved. So what I mean by that is, hey, don't expect the device algorithm to solve everything for you, but to solve one very specific thing. What is the time that you're most likely going to make a purchase in a day, or most likely going to open the app in a day? Like just narrow it to that super specific decision, or narrow it towards, hey, what is the price range that this person buys within? If you try to make too many decisions in one, it's likely going to end up being a black box. You don't understand. You can't really control the messaging. You can't really have the human element blended into it as well. And that's where a lot of the times, example that you gave earlier, right? You return the product and then you receive a remarketing or like asking if you like it. A lot of these may be data driven, right? Because they show that, hey, these customers, if I send it, they end up buying more, but there is correlation, not causation, because these customers are buying again and again and again. So they're more likely to open, they're more active. So that's why when we make decisions using automation, also very important. Choosing channel, choosing timing, let's be super specific and slowly build those learnings over time. So that's actually the bridge that I wanted to make between, hey, problems, but also solving solutions in a kind of like practical manner.
Sure. Great point, Julia.
Thank you, Julia. So there are lots of lessons that one can learn from what you've improved over time at Zalora. Any more lessons that you can share in terms of how you've improved the CRM program over time, Jilan?
If there's something that I want to touch on, is about breaking silos within the organization. That's definitely a huge challenge, right? Because it's easy to say, hey, it's the same customer, but functions are usually set up, not built to serve the customer together, right? And that's where I think if there should be a focus, that should be one of the key things, right? Every channel can do something, but as touched on a lot today, how do we make sure it's incremental, right? We can say that we're going to use attribution, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, but until we can have a commitment, which brings the different teams together, have an aligned objective to build that experience, and them having the same view, it's going to be very hard to do that. So I think that that's really very important. Break down those silos such that when it comes to the customer journey, these squads need to come together. They need to be functional in that manner so that they really speak end to end. If there are other things that I learned over time, I think customer centricity is very important, right? But of course, organizations face the battle. Hey, why invest so much now? Build a world-class stack when I cannot leverage the benefit, right? Maybe I should learn how to drive before buying a sports car, as an example. So I think really it's about, okay, what are the problems you want to have? When are you going to rebuild? When are you going to approach it? So really the lessons that I learned is, in the past, I tried to prepare too much for the future, but with the advancements in technology these days, that might not be too good to have too long a time frame. Maybe you just want to keep to 3 years at most, right? Hey, because even in next year, you never know what happened. I think COVID really taught us that, and the need to adapt and pivot super fast was very, very, very important. So those will be the two things that I will add on top of what I spoke about earlier, of like, making sure that we look at it end to end and automating very, very specific decisions.
Excellent, thank you. And so Suresh, Majid, and Jillian, we have just a very short amount of time left, but perhaps if there are questions in the chat beyond another 5 minutes or so, we could just keep talking for now. But Suresh, what's your experience been in regards to improvement of CRM programs?
Yeah, I think I mean to Gillian's point, yes, buying a sports car just to be photographed at least, okay, not necessarily having learned to be driving it, etc. I think absolutely, don't boil the ocean. Yeah, get it. Yes, the thing is, like, my experience has been that both sides, in terms of looking at the entire behavior and then trying to see, okay, which of the technology possibilities you can start to phase them into the whole process. Yeah. At the same time, looking at all the technology that you've bought, and then looking at it in terms of saying, okay, which of the funds that we need to kind of prioritize. And that's been the challenge that when we have been working on consumer brands, for example, it's both of these things where there are lots of possibilities, but in terms of prioritization and then looking at in terms of like the rollouts of that, I mean, that's been one of the biggest things in terms of getting this roadmap underway.
Thanks, Suresh. Appreciate that additional insight, especially buying the sports car to be photographed in it, at least. Zeno, I think we may have some time to hear more about perhaps some of the potential pitfalls that you might go back and change. You've noted a couple. What would you do differently or advise other companies to watch out for if they were just starting off further than you've already alluded to?
Yep. So first thing that I want to make super clear is that, of course, when we started, conditions were a bit different, right? Today, data privacy is a huge topic, right? Scams are everywhere. You have GDPR up and running, different legislations, especially in Southeast Asia. Every country might have a different approach. So if I were to do things differently, of course, that would be a different time. But if we were in the age today, data privacy is one of the most important things. It needs to be something that everyone is literate in the organization in understanding that, because a lot of the times, at least as businesses, truth be told, that tends to be an afterthought. As you say, hey, does that drive sales, right? You don't think, is my data safe? That's not as a natural flow of progression. But in today's day and age, that's probably the most important thing. We cannot treat it as a side project, right? There must be the right build-up of policies over time, the right build-up of practices over time, because not doing it right can result in very, very catastrophic failure, simply because so many things are online. A lot of crime is also done online, and therefore that can harm our organization in a much larger manner than ever before. So that's the first and most important thing that I wanted to just lay as kind of like the ground first. If I would say there were other learnings, I would say in terms of valuing accessibility to data in the right way. All right, Majid spoke about it earlier, right? Having a lot of data, not really acting upon it. That is definitely a problem. I think accessibility to data comes down to, is it going to be used? And is it going to be used very frequently? Is it going to be used to make decisions very frequently? And therefore, it being meaningful. I think that's the thing to really, really focus upon at all levels, right? Because I can provide a dashboard, but if it's not going to give a meaningful decision-making process, then it kind of beats the point to build so many KPIs or have so much information that at the end of the day just gives us a feeling that we have a better story around it. We like to construct stories as humans to make sense of things, but sometimes those might not reflect reality. So that's number one. Number two, I think in terms of balancing that short run, long run trade-off, we talked about it already slightly earlier, I was sharing, right? And I think I just want to just share the experience. Short run targets are always pressing, right? But how I would suggest we approach that is discuss, most importantly, the non-negotiables, right? And then from there, everything, have that common understanding, these are what are things that we can be flexible with or not, right? If everything is non-negotiable, then you're not really, I would say, building the product together. You're just carrying out, executing what is demanded of you. So I think that element is very important, because if you do not have that, you can't have collaboration. You can't build a cohesive customer journey. What you have is in someone's mind, what they think is right, and you doing it. In some cases, that works out well, looking at how some organizations now dominate the industry, but that's the 0.001% of companies. All right. Last thing, I think that this is something that becomes super, super relevant in today's day and age. We've seen it since COVID as well. It's emphasizing on adaptability and change, right? The speed of change is actually super important because, example, pre-COVID, and then when COVID started, the disruption that it caused to several industries, every day that you waited and hoped for the best was a day that you are going deeper and deeper into the hole. So really having technology and having a lot of these, I think, changes as such a commonplace of our lives today, that adaptability should be something that's a non-negotiable, right? It's like we respond to the market. It doesn't matter that what we used to do is around selling dresses. If right now what's most important is sanitizers and face masks, sanitizers and face masks it is, because hoping for the best is not going to change. We need to adapt as an organization, and you see that over time, right? That's something whereby, hey, a lot of the organizations that have been around for super long, they've adapted, they've gone with the times. Just that with technology today and with how the industry is changing, with all these things going on, that becomes super important, and that really differentiates the ones who succeed and the ones who really fall off.
Thank you very much, Gillian. That's really, I think, great education and help for those who are listening on this call. We have a few minutes left, and I'd like to ask really each of you, perhaps, starting with Majid, to maybe touch on some of the customer engagement brands' brilliance. How do those companies need to rely on technology and teams? And then, give us some insights onto that very quickly, and then a takeaway, just one takeaway from today, and then we'll pass back to Julian, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to keep it very quick for this one. So this is based on, the CER report that I talked about. There are three different maturity models that we see, right? So when it comes to customer engagement, the first is activate, meaning you are just recognizing customer engagement as an important to business goals. And these brands typically focus on, campaign and channel specific solutions with limited metrics, right? So this is what brands were just getting started. And then the second maturity would be accelerate, somewhere in the middle, right? So brands on this level collaborate across departments, right? And having a strong experimentation culture, and also the metrics is like somewhat better than the beginning stages of customer engagement. But of course, everybody wants to be that exceptional brand. So what do top performing brands do, right, when it comes to customer engagement, right? So these are the brands. For them, customer engagement is life cycle centric, owned by cross-functional teams, and built on streaming data, right? So for me, Tim, the takeaway today is data, very important. It's not just about collecting data, it's about using the data to create meaningful customer engagement. Number two, if you're a brand not engaging with your consumers at all, start engaging, at least using one channel. Try and bring in cross-channel customer experience, because that's what going to create a connected, cohesive customer experiences. Your consumers are much faster in adapting to new technologies and devices and channels. As a brand, you should be doing that too. Tim, that's my takeaway.
Super, thank you. Julian, if I may, what's your key takeaway? I've got a lot of them, but what's your key that you want to get across to the attendees?
If there's really so much content today, right? And the really important thing that stood out to me is, I think, understand how you are driving value, right? Not the how you want to, but how it actually creates value for the customer. If you understand that, then we won't be disrupted by all the noise, because from today's conversation, it's obvious there's so many things, right? And it's easy to get caught with a divided focus. But if you're clear, this is the how very clearly, that it provides value to the customer. There is something you can verify, there's something you can iterate, and that's something you can build upon and multiply. So I think that's the most important thing. Be super clear with the how you are creating value, not just on what you imagine, but that it needs to be validated. Then from there, you can blend in the other things whereby, hey, having that data centricity, having the cross-channel, because those are all mostly means to get to the end. But if you're not sure how that value is even being created for the customer, it's pointless. I can have the perfect cross-channel orchestration, but if all my messages are exactly the same, then that makes zero sense to the customer. It provides no value. It provides no incremental value.
That's great, wonderful. Thank you very much. I know we could talk for another month or so on this topic, because there's so much that's happened over the course of long time and within COVID. But thank you very much for today. I appreciate all of that conversation, hearing and learning what we can look forward to in building CRM loyalty acquisition strategies in commerce. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.